looks like we are live. We have folks coming in. My apologies to everyone. I am the culprit behind us starting late this morning. Um, I'm going to blame it on being in a different time zone and maybe not quite as with it this morning as I normally would be if it were 2 hours later. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, David, for being here as always.
Good to be here, thanks.
For folks who are tuning in for the first time or who have not had the great pleasure of reading David Pepper's Pepperspectives newsletter on Substack, you want to make a habit of doing that. It is phenomenal. You also get cartoons, which are amazing. It's which day do they come out? Tuesdays?
Tuesday, pretty much,
Tues
yeah.
Yeah, amazing artist, that David works with, so, check him out for all the good writing and for a really interesting, important way of getting political messaging across, which at some point I've gotta write something about the connection between political cartooning and what we saw at the No Kings
Yeah,
protests,
true.
because there are real ties in that. It's another effective way. Inflatable suits are another effective way of, getting the information across. So, that is not what we're talking about this morning. This morning, as we were just saying, as people were beginning to join, we're gonna nerd out a little bit on the Constitution, which always really excites me, and David has a great piece in his Perspectives newsletter this morning. So, David, we are going to talk about Section 4.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's called Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. It is completely overlooked, but it actually is sort of the key to figuring out what's happening now, and the founders worried about exactly what we're dealing with. So this is called the Guarantee Clause, and it's one of the many clauses of the Constitution that over the years, kinda like the disqualification clause, sorta gets read out, like it's not really there, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't have any effect. But the founders, gave a lot of power to states when we arranged this grand compromise of the Constitution. The states determined who got to vote, the states essentially drew the district lines, the state had other powers. But the founders didn't just give them that on the basically without any conditions attached. They actually did that on a very simple condition, and this is what Article 4, Section 4 says. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. Shall guarantee, lawyers will know, that's the strongest language in the law. There's nowhere else in the Constitution that anything is written so strongly. Um, and Republican form of government, and this is something that the right likes to sort of get all hopped up about, like it means something different from what we think of as democracy. But by Republican form of government, what the founders meant was that the sovereign that government represents is the people through representatives. We know that when they said democracy, or they did not mean then or now. Direct democracy Athens style. Like,
Right.
so the right likes to try and get all worked up. We're not a democracy or a republic. The truth is we're both. We're a democratic republic. But what this clause did is it said that basically it was a deal. You get states have power, but that power that we are giving you is conditioned on a guarantee that you are a republican form of government. You're not a monarchy in a state, and you're supposed to, and what they really meant by Republican form of government is majority rules, that the majority of the state's voters are generally reflected in the representation of the legislature of that government. And what I think the reason, and they guaranteed this, by the way, and starts to get to things like ALEC and corruption. They made this guarantee because in recent history, they had seen before the founding these smaller state governments be corrupted by certain interests. They literally wrote things like, "We are worried that what they called rich men will use state houses to undermine our new federal nation." as my he was my professor at law school. Akil Amar, no one knows the Constitution better than the founding. He wrote, for example, they worried. This is his quote: "A warped state government might corrupt the integrity of that state's election."
Yeah. Oop, I've lost.
Us then this might happen. But they were so worried about it that they put a guarantee in that we would make sure that states were Republican forms of government. And so the reason I talk about this so much is because when we are in office, we take an oath at the federal level to uphold that guarantee clause. That's part of the oath. But also as grassroots leaders and candidates, we also should see the insight. And the founders were right. When we see Texas, when we see Ohio, when we see these state houses that are no longer functioning democracies, when we see them gerrymander like they're doing, this is literally is exactly what the founders were saying. If these states are not in the end moored back to their people, this is what will happen. So I put it out there because I think it's a frame that we should never forget as we if we're in power in Washington, we should act upon that clause. We should guarantee that states are actually functioning rule of law democracies or republics. But as we also strategize our own way of getting out of this mess, we should all be living that guarantee clause so that next year we're focused on those Texas Republicans who just did what they did, or Ohio, and we don't ignore this initial wisdom, which is if states are no longer rule of law republics or democracies, the entire nation is at risk. And again, this isn't some liberal pipe dream. This is textualism. This is originalism. This is what the founders warned us and told us to do something about, and we should all be acting on it.
Right, and this is what our Supreme Court, conservative majority tells us that they actually deeply care about,
Yeah,
and right, they're contextualists. It's a very convenient, form of textualism that they actually adhere to, sort of when they can rule, um, the way they want to, and it's contextual, then they believe in that, and then they believe in something else incredibly convoluted
yeah,
when they don't wanna have to rule that way.
yeah,
There's so many, parts of the Constitution that we refer to as being really prescient, and it's remarkable how how this document could have been created that could, stand the test of time the way it has, but this clause is not that, right? This clause is, we just saw it. We were just controlled by a monarchy, and we've already seen corruption happening on the state level, so we need to do something about this now so we don't repeat. It wasn't a fanciful, this could possibly happen down the road.
yeah. And like I said, they said if we're not careful, states could get rigged so that those officials are fixed in power, which is what we're living through with gerrymandering. And once they're there, we are worried that rich interests, or they worried about the monarchy itself, would use these rigged state governments to not only not reflect the citizens of those states, but to even worse in their mind um, undermine the new federal government. And they worried, and so like ALEC is literally the modern day version of what they worried that someone would get their hands on state governments and use those governments to do what they're doing on issues, be it all sorts of issues, but also on what I just read, using those state governments to undermine congressional elections, so they could control that through these states. It's exactly they literally could not have predicted it, and what they were saying was, "The federal government has a right to protect us from this." And so I do think there's some legal reasons why in the future, we are seeing a lot of pro-democracy people of all parties say, "We need to have our own vision of Project 2030 or Project 2000," whatever we call it. And I think breathing life back into this central commitment that states are democracies or republicans republics as they're defined. I think that's a really important part of it because without that, the presidency matters, but you could elect a different president if you continue to have states that are essentially not functioning democracies, most of the extremism, most of the lawlessness continues. We saw it continue when Biden was president because the state house, that's where Dobbs came from, right? It came from
Right.
Mississippi. You could have a Democrat if we continue to let dozens of state houses essentially no longer being functioning democracies, then the damage to our democracy across the country will continue, even if we are in power in Washington. And that's why I think the next time we have the chance in power, fixing this, acting upon this, as again that professor said, he's described it. This is a democratic insurance policy written into the Constitution, and we just have kind of let it die. And I think that it's something that it has to be core if we're going to really get out of this mess, short, medium, and long term. Re again, upping it and making it strong again, I think is a really important step.
Well, we see ruling after ruling is chipping away at the Voting Rights Act,
Yeah,
and there's another. We're waiting for another ruling that is or decision that is probably going to um, do
yeah.
maybe put the final nail in the coffin for the Voting Rights Act. But does does this clause in the Constitution essentially, obviously not step by step what states have to do in order to be in compliance, but could it not be applied that way?
Here's the thing about it, and it is this has gotten the reason it's largely forgotten is because this is something that the Supreme Court has said is part of a political question doctrine that the court is not supposed to weigh in on. So people's response already was, well, why don't we sue and say that they're violating the guarantee clause? And I don't agree with this, but the court has said, oh no, no, you're not allowed to sue on the guarantee clause. It's a political question. Okay. Which means if the Congress and Klobuchar actually started talking about this, if the Congress were to push forward something that said, we insist on ending gerrymandering and we are grounding our demand in the guarantee clause, if the court is going to be consistent, and they are, obviously they're not always consistent, but if someone were to sue, you could say to the court, "Oh, I'm sorry, you said this was a political question. We're acting upon our guarantee clause power. You don't get to overrule that because you said it's a political question." So the truth is, the way they framed it is we can't sue Mississippi or Texas and say you're no longer a republic. They've said that's not allowed. But what they have said is this is a power that Congress has or the federal government has that actually the court can't even review. So my view would be come up with sort of anti-gerrymandering, pro-democracy changes and say, we're not just founding this on the Equal Protection Clause or the 15th Amendment. We're basing it on the Guarantee Clause. And the court has said that is our job to do. And they can't overturn it because we are now upholding the guarantee that we all took an oath to. So, there's a power to it that puts it above most of the other things the court, as you just described. And why is the court destroying the VRA? No deference to Congress. It might have been 98-0 Senate vote and Bush signed it, but the court says we don't like it. By their own words, they've said the guarantee clause is something that they cannot review. And that's why I say, okay, let's use that then and end gerrymandering based upon the guarantee that these states be republics, and the current there is no way so one time every time I mention the word democracy, I get right wing, "Oh, it's a royal republic, not a democracy." I'll say, "Fine. The current gerrymandered condition of our states is neither a republic nor a democracy. It is what the founders feared. It is a group of people completely cordoned off from the everyone else, locked in power. Nothing can change it. When we try to change it, like we did in Ohio, they ignore the law, they ignore the courts. This is not a republic. This is just a group of people sidelined, put into place by rich people largely, doing things that are lawless. And so, again, call it a republic, call it a democracy. These states are neither of those things. And that's one of the essential problems in our country. And there's a clause in the Constitution that says that's not okay. And we have to all again, I want when Amy Klobuchar is the majority, I want her to push forward on her voting laws as she's done. talking to the guarantee clause. But the rest of us, we need to see this insight that the founders knew was a problem. Everything they said is happening. And
Yep.
so when we campaign, like I said this at I spoke at the No Kings rally. When we campaign, it's not just about reelecting our Democratic congressman from Ohio. It's about going to the state house where most of the stuff is happening and also campaigning there. So see their wisdom. There are things they didn't get right. They got this really right. And as we organize for our future elections to save democracy, we have to act on that insight. Or we could have wins that feel good, but wins that don't get us to the heart of the problem.
And I always love it when there is actually something positive that is happening that is an example of exactly what you're talking about. And we just saw in Indiana because people did show up. Voters put pressure on the Republican legislature in Indiana that their gerrymandering did not go forward
Yeah.
this time. So, talk to us a little bit
Yeah.
about what just happened there.
Knock on wood. I've kind of so a couple weeks ago, I started to hear from folks in Indiana, "Hey, some of our," and good for them. If this is true and they hold the line, I will be there. But I go to Indiana a lot. They have been stuck with some terrible things, just like Ohio. Remember Obama won Indiana, uh,
That's
but they
wild.
have been incredibly gerrymandered. But I heard from people who actually work with legislators there and lobby both sides. About 3 weeks ago, one of them said to me, it's kind of funny. I'm getting a sense that some of the Republicans in this legislature are not comfortable with what's being demanded of them. Now, I didn't wanna jinx anything, so I kept that to myself. But, you know, the other states folded pretty quickly. Texas, Missouri, Ohio's gonna do it. But the silence in Indiana, despite JD Vance flying in, despite Trump making calls, has been interesting, and it looks like they are struggling. Now, again, knock on wood, I don't wanna jinx it. I'm gonna talk in a couple days to an Indiana friend who's up to speed on it. But the Indiana activists have done big signature drives. There's polling that I was just sent that suggests that the people of Indiana are not into this midterm rigging of elections. But most importantly, it sounds as if, and they'll get a lot of pressure on them, so I hope they hold ground. It sounds as if some of the Indiana legislators, the Republicans, are kinda like, remember Rusty, the Arizona guy who wouldn't go along in 2020,
Yep.
conservative guy, or Raffensperger. It sounds like there are some Indiana Republicans who find what's being demanded of them offensive. And so, at least for now, they're hesitating to go along, and I just hope, this is where, and we have Republicans like that here. Our former Chief Justice was a Republican, was a key champion in protecting democracy here in '23 and wants to end gerrymandering, and my hope is that we could all be savvy enough to figure out how can we help this bipartisan coalition that apparently exists in Indiana hold ground, because that would be a major win to even have any states show other states, Republicans in those states, we don't have to go along with this stuff. It's completely lawless. This is rigging an election in advance. And if you have a handful of Indiana Republicans who hold this thing up, it would be great. Like, knock on wood, it feels like that's what's happening. They're going to amp things up. They're clearly going to threaten primaries. But, good for folks who are holding out till now, and let's hope it continues.
There's so much partisanship in this
Yeah.
country right now, obviously. We talk about it all the time, but there are folks like the Republican in Ohio you just mentioned, and we hope these Republicans in Indiana who are not on board, and a lot of people who were formerly in office and on the state level have relationships with Republican voters that are still meaningful to those Republican voters. There's still trust there because they know these people well. Are we doing a good enough job of reaching out? And I'm when I say we, I mean the pro-democracy side. Are we doing a good enough job reaching out to current and former Republican leaders, and even, community members who are influential and bringing them on board this movement so it isn't for Republican voters who do want to be able to feel like they can be a part of this,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel so partisan.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is we're probably not most of the time, but at key moments, when we had our so in August, speaking of these ridiculously undemocratic state houses, in August of '23, because they knew we had a pro-choice, essentially, referendum coming in November, they upped the threshold in Ohio to 60%. They tried to amend the Constitution. A perfect example, the founders would have said, "That is not what a state should be doing. You're supposed to be reflecting your citizens." This was a way for them to stop that. In that election, it was an amazing example of Republicans who were offended by it being not just I wouldn't even say welcomed in, but joining together with Democrats and with nonpartisan groups like the League of Women Voters and saying, "No, we're not gonna kneecap our democracy." And we all work together very well. Business groups work together well. And that coalition is what crushed that thing. I mean, you remember this was supposed to be a 8% turnout in an August
Yep, that
election. They
was
hoped no one would be paying
amazing.
attention. It had almost a midterm turnout. They lost in Republican counties, but it was the sort of the multi-partisan nature of the coalition that I think was such an important part, and so in that example, it came together well. I mean, my guess is in the day-to-day, as we've written and talked about in the past, sometimes we screw it up. A Republican tells us, "Oh my gosh, I can't sell any of my products," and we too often our response is, "Well, good, you had it coming," or
Right,
FAFO or whatever.
right,
That's not what we wanna do. What we wanna do is when we can, and by the way, we need to connect the policy to the negative outcome. I agree with that. I
right.
want people to see it, but we should never celebrate the moment when people see the pain and say anything but like, "This is what we've been worried about. We thought this would happen. Join us to stop it." And when we did that in Ohio, well, on reproductive freedom and on the original gerrymandering referenda, and on this issue one, the 60%, it was amazing what happened. And so again, like if these groups in Indiana, if this group of Indian Republicans hold the line, like we've got to figure out how to take that kind of coming together and keep it going because there is a majority here that doesn't want what Trump is doing, even in states like Indiana, even in states like Ohio. If we fracture over other issues, you don't see it.
Right.
But if you're smart enough to figure out, "Oh my gosh," like the Chief Justice of Ohio, who I remember as a younger Democrat, I thought was a big Republican. We not only are friendly, but we couldn't agree more on this. Let's work together. That's the kind of coalition that you win with. And even in more red states, that is actually how you're gonna win.
Yeah, I wanna leave it there. I think this is a way to end on empathy, which
Yep.
society is far too devoid of right now, and it's such a place, a tool for us to be able to connect on a very human level rather than a political partisan level. Because when we see these negative repercussions of what the GOP in power is creating right now.
Yeah.
We know people are starting to look at their health exchanges and seeing, it's not just the Democrats were saying this was going to happen to scare people, but
Yeah.
here it is on a government website. Like you can't pretend this isn't happening, and this is where. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or unaffiliated, whatever you are, those dollars are dollars out of people's pockets regardless of party, and
Yeah.
that means people regardless of party don't get healthcare, and they
Yep.
don't and people die is the bottom
And we need
line,
to yeah.
and we don't wanna see anyone of any political
Yep.
persuasion have that happen to them or
Right.
someone that they love.
Can I end on a good note as well?
Please.
Remember we talked a couple weeks ago about, the folks I talked to at that wedding?
Yes.
So the logger and his wife from a rural county in Kentucky. Well, Governor Bashir was in town 2 days ago in Cincinnati, and so I reached out to these new friends of mine, and I invited them to the event, and so they got to meet the governor, Bashir, and tell them their story. So
Oh, that's great.
and he was it was an Ohio event. He was clearly thrilled to meet folks from Kentucky there. But here they were having told me that story at a wedding, and a couple weeks later, they were able to say to the governor, "Hey, we're really struggling," and he knows this because he's very in tune, and he says, "We've got your back, we're working on this and that." So that there's a full circle there that, again, they were Democrats in the end, but I don't again, the point was I didn't care, but they were able to meet the governor and explain to him what they had explained to me, and my hope is that'll build something that can help provide relief in some of these communities. So a good ending to that happenstance conversation at a wedding.
That's so great. I think people underestimate their ability to have access to their elected representatives,
Yeah,
and you really can. Your local representative, you can get them, you can get their ear,
yeah,
very
yeah. No,
frequently, and those
he immediately
conversations
stopped.
matter, and
Yeah. He immediately stopped, paid attention, listened, and then was like, "We're gonna work on this. We're doing this. We're doing that." So it was a great human moment where they could tell their story to their own governor.
that's great.
Yeah,
Thank you
fun.
for sharing that with us, David. I love our conversations. I love the positivity in them. Everybody, there are obviously, elections around the corner. Check out what you can do in Virginia in David's latest Substack as well. There are you don't have to be from Virginia to phone bank to help get the vote out and make sure that
Yeah, of
this goes the right way. So, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, David, so much
course.
for another wonderful conversation. And we will see everybody next Thursday.
Great. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Lisa.
Bye, all.
See
Thanks,
ya.
Dave.